You've probably heard all this buzz about cloud migration, right?
Yeah, definitely it's everywhere these days.
It seems like everybody's got a different take on if it's really the right move or not, you know?
I know, it's like every tech blog is a different opinion.
Exactly.
Right.
So today, we're going to try to cut through all that noise.
Yeah.
We're going to do a deep dive and try to give you the tools you need to actually make some decisions about on-premise versus cloud.
That's what we're here for, to like equip you with the knowledge to really figure out what matters for you specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Love that.
No.
So before we get into all the details, what does on-premise versus cloud actually mean?
Well, this blog we're looking at today really nails it.
Okay.
It boils down to where things are managed.
Okay.
With on-premise, it's like running your own data center.
All right.
You're handling the servers, the software, the applications, everything.
So it's like you're your own IT department.
Exactly. With cloud, you're basically paying someone else to take care of all that.
Okay.
Like those big names you hear about AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform.
Right. Even Snowflake's getting in on that now, too, which is interesting.
Oh, totally. And the key here is that this responsibility thing is like a spectrum.
Right.
This visual from Google shows it perfectly. As you go from traditional on-premise to software as a service, or SaaS, things start to shift.
Okay.
More and more stuff becomes the provider's problem. They actually have these green boxes in the graphic to show it.
Wow, that's really helpful to actually see it visually.
Yeah, it makes it way more clear.
Because it's not just the definitions, it's about seeing who's in control, you know?
Exactly. And that's where the decisions get really interesting.
Okay.
Because as you move along this spectrum from infrastructure as a service, IaaS, where they manage the hardware, to platform as a service, PAN-AOS, where they manage even more, all the way to SaaS, where they handle almost everything.
Yeah.
Your choices really impact your flexibility costs, even security.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Those are the details I need to know.
Yeah.
Let's get into the real world stuff. How do these models actually work in practice?
All right, let's get into it.
So we talked about this whole spectrum of cloud models, but I'm really interested in how they actually work, you know?
Yeah.
This drug we have does a cool job of like comparing on-premise and cloud across all these factors.
Oh, yeah.
And the one that really stuck out to me was scalability. They used that example of Snowflake versus like Microsoft SQL Server,
Right.
which I thought was super relatable.
Yeah, it's a great example because it shows how much more agile the cloud can be.
Okay.
So imagine you've got an e-commerce business, right? And suddenly it's the holidays and your traffic goes through the roof.
Oh, yeah.
With a traditional setup like Microsoft SQL Server, you're kind of stuck with the servers you've got.
Oh, no.
You have to like scramble to get new hardware, install it all, configure it.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It's a huge pain and super expensive.
I can imagine.
But with a cloud solution like Snowflake, you can just scale up instantly.
So you only pay for what you need, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's super flexible.
That's that elasticity thing everyone keeps talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a game changer, especially for businesses with unpredictable growth.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about like the day-to-day stuff, though?
Sure.
This blog was really emphasizing the time-saving aspect of cloud.
Oh, absolutely.
And as someone with a million things going on, that sounds amazing.
Right.
But how much are you actually offloading to the provider?
It really depends.
Okay.
Because the blog mentioned this shared responsibility model.
Uh-huh. And I wasn't totally clear on what that meant.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky. Basically, the level of management you're responsible for depends on which cloud model you choose.
Okay.
With Isaiah, you still have to deal with operating systems, middleware data, and all that.
Okay.
But with PAWS and SaaS, the provider takes on more and more of that burden.
So it's kind of like choosing between a self-driving car and one with a chauffeur.
Exactly. You still need to know where you're going, but the level of control you have can vary.
I like that analogy. Speaking of control, the blog also talked about flexibility and agility being big benefits of cloud. They even said it's super important for industries like tech and healthcare. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, definitely. In today's world, being able to adapt quickly is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
And the cloud lets businesses do that. They can test new applications, roll out updates way faster than with traditional on-premise setups.
So it's like the difference between trying to turn a giant ship and a speedboat.
Yeah, exactly.
One is built for stability, the other one's all about speed and agility. This is all making sense, but before we go full steam ahead on cloud migration, is there ever a reason to stick with what you know?
Oh, definitely. Cloud isn't always the answer.
Okay, good, because I was going to say this blog we have actually talk about some of the downsides.
Right. There's a whole section on when it might be better to hold off on a full cloud migration.
Okay, yeah, what are some of those situations? When is on-premise still king?
Well, one big one is when you've got super sensitive data,
Right.
like government agencies, healthcare companies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even with all the security measures in the cloud, some organizations just don't want to risk having their data off-site.
It's like that control thing again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes the data is so sensitive that even encryption isn't enough.
Wow, so what do those organizations do then? The blog mentioned that, to give any examples?
Yeah, like some places will keep everything completely offline,
Oh, wow.
like in a totally separate environment that's not connected to any networks.
Like a digital vault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Multiple layers of security, super restricted access.
Okay, so it sounds like security and compliance are really important. But what about that legacy systems thing? The blog mentioned that too.
Oh yeah, legacy systems can be a real headache.
I bet. What's that deal with them?
So many companies have been using these old systems for years and years,
Right.
and trying to move them to the cloud is a nightmare.
Oh, I can imagine.
It can be super expensive and take forever.
So sometimes it's easier to just stick with what you know.
Sometimes, yeah. The blog actually had a case study where a company saved money by upgrading their old systems before they even thought about cloud migration.
Interesting. So it's not always as simple as just flipping a switch and moving everything over.
Nope. It takes planning and strategy.
This has been super helpful. So
Mhm.
for anyone listening who's trying to wrap their head around all this, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
I'd say don't just jump on the cloud bandwagon because everyone else is. Really think about your own needs and what makes sense for your situation.
That's great advice. Don't be afraid to ask questions and do your research.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. There are experts out there who can guide you through this stuff.
Awesome. Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up. This deep dive has really shown that cloud migration isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
It's about finding the right fit for your organization.
And sometimes that means sticking with on-premise for now.
Yep.
But hey, at least now you've got the knowledge to make that decision confidently right.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for putting it all down for us.
Anytime. It's great being here.
And thanks to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive into the world of on-premise versus cloud. We'll catch you next time.